we will go ahead and get started. Welcome to those of you who are joining us in person and to everyone who is joining us virtually, including our speaker for today. Before we start the talk, I want to tell you a little bit about the Frances McClelland Institute and acknowledge where we are. I'm Melissa Barnett. I'm the director of the Frances McClelland Institute for Children, Youth, and Families. This presentation is the final presentation for this semester in our Turbeville speaker series, but we hope you join us in February for the second part of our series for this academic year. And although many of you are in various places around the country, those of us who are here in Tucson, we think it's important to acknowledge where we sit and the collective debt we owe to Native communities by sharing the official land acknowledgement of the University of Arizona, which was developed in partnership with local tribes. Specifically, we respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. So at the Frances McClelland Institute for Children, Youth, and Families, FMI, our goal is to work collaboratively to build strong communities that promote resilience so that children, youth, and families from marginalized backgrounds have the opportunities to thrive. We do this by supporting innovative research, by actively partnering with community organizations, by sharing research findings with practitioners in the community, and by educating the next generation of engaged scholars and leaders. All of the work we do is to honor sorry about the slide, I'm not sure what happened, to honor the legacy of Frances McClelland. Frances was a University of Arizona alum. She was a very generous philanthropist and tireless advocate for children, youth, families, women, individuals with disabilities, and others from marginalized populations. She understood and facilitated resilience in the lives of others and in her own life, and we are grateful for her contributions. We also want to acknowledge the contributions of Pamela Turbeville, an alum of the Norton School, who continues to be a generous and supportive member of our community. And before I turn it over to the real reason you are here, I want to tell you a little bit about our guest speaker. Dr. Kerri Rodriguez is an assistant professor in the College of Veterinary Medicine here at the U of A. As the director of the Human-Animal Bond Lab, her research explores the role and impacts of the human-animal bond for both human and animal well-being across a variety of settings, populations, and contexts. Dr. Rodriguez received her Ph.D. in human-animal interaction from Purdue University, completed a postdoctoral research fellowship at Colorado State University, and joined the University of Arizona faculty in 2023. Her work has been highlighted in media outlets, including the BBC, the Washington Post, New York Magazine, People Magazine, and National Geographic. Dr. Rodriguez has also served as a subject matter expert for leading HAI, human-animal interaction, organizations, including the North American Veterinary Community and the Association of Animal-Assisted Intervention Professionals. I know we are all really looking forward to hearing about your work. And so I will turn it over to you. I will stop sharing and let Dr. Rodriguez share her slides. If you have questions, we ask that you hold those questions until the end. We'll have time at the end. And if you're joining us online, you can put the questions into the chat. If you're here, you can go ahead and raise your hand.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for that intro. And sorry for those in person that I cannot be here today. We had a last minute work trip. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a speaker for this series. And hello to everyone online as well. I'm going to be talking today about my research area and largely kind of the work that's been done a little bit here at University of Arizona, but largely just talking about this field as a whole, about what science says behind the human-dog relationship. So just a little bit of a primer, because I think this is new to a lot of people. We have a human-animal interaction research hub here at the University of Arizona. We are a group located in the College of Veterinary Medicine and relatively new. This is a college, the newest college at the University of Arizona that was opened in 2020. And our entire research focus is on the human-animal relationship. So our goal is to put strong science behind the human-animal relationship and how that affects the health of animals, humans, and our communities at large. I lead one of these research groups in the College of Veterinary Medicine called the HAB Lab, or the Human Bond Lab, where I am focused specifically on quantifying those relationships. But I am lucky enough to be joined by 3 other faculty that lead research groups in this space. We like to say that we have expertise on 2 ends of the leash. Dr. O'Hare and I focus a lot on human psychology to understand how and why animals are benefiting human health and well-being, studying a lot of things like stress and anxiety and well-being. And Dr. McLean and Dr. Bray are really focusing on the dog side of things, understanding their side of the equation. So we're really lucky to be here in the new Vet Med hub, and excited to bring this area of research to University of Arizona, where, of course, you guys are doing such impactful work on families and children. And our psychology program here has been so great to work with, and we're excited to collaborate. So just a little bit of a background of currently what we are researching in my lab. So we have active projects under 3 umbrellas. The first is, of course, looking at the role of pets in our lives. We have some studies looking at healthy aging and the role of pets in kind of momentary well-being. We also study therapy dogs, so some studies on therapy dogs in children's hospitals, currently a study on therapy dogs for police officers as well. And then by far, our biggest area of research currently is on service dogs, where we are actually looking at the efficacy and role of psychiatric service dogs for disorders such as post-traumatic stress disorder among military veterans, as well as children with autism. I'm really going to kind of skip over a lot of our research today, but happy to chat with anyone if you want to learn more about what we're doing here at the University of Arizona and talk about why dogs, which I think is a really interesting question that I like to talk about. So one of the reasons why we focus a lot on human-dog relationships and that dogs are really prevalent in our lives in these roles is because dogs and humans share a very long evolutionary history. There's a reason why they're called man's best friend. If you were not aware, dogs were the first animal to be domesticated anywhere between 15,000 and upwards of 40,000 years ago. We know that it's been at least this long because archaeologists have found evidence of dogs being buried with their owners as far back as the Paleolithic era, which was about 15,000 years ago. So we know that we've been cohabitating and, importantly, having a relationship for at least this long. Being buried together very much signifies that there was a bond here. And to give you a bit of reference on how long we truly have been hanging out together, the agricultural revolution was about 10,000 years ago, which is when humans first started to grow crops and form settlements. And the first evidence of writing was about 5,000 years ago, around when camels and chickens started to be domesticated. So super long time to be living amongst each other and learning from each other. And what we know is that humans and dogs have co-evolved together, meaning that our 2 species have evolved in tandem by exerting selection pressures on each other and really to become best friends. Fast forward to 2024, dogs are very widespread, especially in our Western culture and in the United States in particular. Currently, half of all US households have a dog, which is on over 65 million households. And for reference, that's double the amount of households that have children. Only about 25% of US households have a child underneath age 18. So lots and lots of Americans are sharing their homes with their dogs. And we really love our dogs, especially here. So 94% of American dog owners consider them their dog a member of the family, which I think a lot of us can relate to. We very much have created this niche in our families for them to fill this familial relationship role. Many individuals include their dogs into family moments, such as holiday cards, vacations, marriage proposals, baby announcements. I'm sure you've seen them. And then we also take a lot of pictures of our dogs, which I think is telling. So many dog owners will say that they've taken more pictures of their dog than of their significant other or their friends. So some evidence here that we're kind of obsessed with our dogs. More evidence of this, researchers have actually tried to quantify this. This one study looked at 500 dog owners from around the country, and they asked them this moral dilemma question, which is that a train is hurtling towards you very fast, sorry, not towards you, towards a person you don't know, essentially a stranger, or your dog. The train is coming very fast. You only have 1 second to make this decision. Who do you save? And what we find is pretty surprising in that almost half of the sample said that they would save their dog. I think this is actually an underestimate because I've asked many people this question and they want to say their dog, but they think that this is not acceptable socially. And they're like, oh, I feel really bad, but I think of my dog, which is a whole phenomenon in itself. But it's really incredible that the emotional bond between a person and their dog is strong enough to make a significant number of individuals consider saving that animal's life over that of another animal of their own species. Last bit of evidence that we really love our dogs is that money, which is one of our very precious resources, is a lot of times spent on making our dogs happy. The pet industry has grown exponentially since the 90s and continues to grow every year. There's always new products and new technology allowing dog owners to spend money on. Of course, we have the latest and greatest dog food of venison and salmon. We have lots of toys and treats. Veterinary care has really taken off. And in fact, the pet industry is on track to be about 150 billion this year, which is huge. So I think very much shows how much we are willing to invest in our pets' well-being and happiness. Okay, so I don't know about you, but my dog doesn't pay rent, does not pay bills, doesn't do any laundry. It very much begs the question, why do we do this? Not only why do we, spend money, but also our time and our energy and our emotions. And I want you to put your science hat on and pretend that you're an alien species observing humans on Earth from your spaceship and trying to figure out why these little humans are so obsessed with these little Earth animals that they put into their homes, even though they don't want any other animals in their homes. They pick up their poop and they sing songs to them, and they would choose to save them over another human. What's going on here? If you were an alien, how would you kind of conceptualize why we do this? So a very real evolutionary explanation for why we do this is that dogs and other cute animals evoke a very natural caregiving response out of us. And essentially, we just can't help it. They're so cute and helpless, and we need to care for them. Not only do we talk to them like we talk to babies, which I'm not going to do my dog voice, but I'm sure you guys have all heard it or your own dog voice. But we have a whole generation of people identifying as pet parents and having fur babies. So we already have that. But in fact, we know this is a thing because when we look at pictures of human babies and baby animals, our brains not only show a lot of immediate activity in our emotion and reward processing areas, which is the amygdala and the medial orbitofrontal cortex, but the brain also secretes chemicals that make you happy, such as dopamine and oxytocin. This happens in males and females of all ages. We know that we're biologically primed to basically fire our brains up when we are seeing babies and baby animals. And the reason why people think this is it's called the baby schema effect. Basically, baby mammals in particular have visual features that essentially prime our brains to think that they're cute and evoke caregiving behaviors, including things like having a larger head relative to their body, so having a bigger forehead, having larger eyes, having overall more rounded features in their head and their body, and being soft overall, having soft body surfaces. So since human babies are helpless for many months, our biological response to care for them and protect them is actually adaptive. It's an evolutionary advantage for our species to keep them safe, presumably for other species as well. So we know that our brains light up, and when we experimentally manipulate images to be more baby schema, so more rounded, larger head, larger eyes, we tend to find an even more exaggerated effect here as young as 3 years old. So very much biologically primed in our brains to have an appreciation for these infant-like features. It's the reason why all these things are cute. So if you look at all these images, you're going to find the same pattern, which is all of these baby schema effects. They don't necessarily need to be young. So there's adult animals that have this, there's non-mammals that have this, and then of course Disney and every other company really capitalizes on the baby schema effect to make their characters seem cute. So looking at dogs, we have all of these things. And in fact, dogs have been both naturally and artificially selected to have these infant-like characteristics throughout their entire lives up until adulthood. In general, domestic dogs have much more baby-like, infant-like types of characteristics compared to wolves. And a key one is actually in the eyes. So not only do dogs have larger eyes relative to wolves, but they have the ability to do this thing, which is the puppy eyes. You guys have all seen it. It is essentially defined by a couple of things. The first is that you have this white underneath the eyes. This is called the sclera. It makes their eyes seem bigger and more human-like. And importantly, you have this little muscle right in the inner eyelid that allows them to raise their eyes up. This is essentially kind of like their eyebrows and make this puppy eye effect. And lo and behold, this is actually a trait and a muscle that dogs have independently evolved that is not exhibited in any other domestic animal or in their closest living relatives, the gray wolf. So this is a special muscle that basically helps them make these puppy eyes. And so anytime you ever see your dog do this, this is an adaptive response to basically manipulate us into being even more baby-like and not be so mad at them when they do something bad or, give them an extra treat, extra piece of cheese. This is all just manipulation, which is the cutest manipulation of all time. Okay, so back to our science experiment of aliens trying to figure out why we do this. So one very plausible explanation is that we're kind of hardwired for this. We can't help it. There's biological basis for this, but that obviously can't explain the whole picture. So there has to be other things happening, which is, begging the question, do we benefit from this relationship? Hopefully we do. And if so, how? So I want to share the science behind what these benefits are and kind of what we know so far about how we are benefiting from their inclusion in our families, in our houses, and our homes. So the first thing we know that's pretty obvious that dogs do is that they provide us companionship. And this companionship is really helpful and supportive, especially when we're going through tough times. And there's been research looking at this specifically that has asked dog owners, when you're feeling all of these bad things, who do you turn to? And what they find is that people are more likely to turn to their dog during tough times than, their best friend, their child, their parent, or their sibling. So we know that there is something going on here that individuals are really turning to their dogs for support when they're alone, depressed, feeling overwhelmed, etc. We know that the support that dogs provide is also famously non-judgmental. They don't ask any questions. They love us no matter what. They provide this unconditional love. And so when we get home from the long day, they're so excited to see us. They don't care if our breath stinks or we have coffee on our shirt or you did something embarrassing. They're also willing to love you no matter where you're at. This is really important for a lot of people, especially those that are socially isolated. This kind of love can make us feel really good. And people have been really interested in this aspect of dog support and have tested this in the lab. So researchers have quantified this by essentially bringing a bunch of undergraduate psychology students to come into a lab and undergo a stressful task, which is super stressful. You can imagine yourself in this situation. Essentially, they asked this person to continuously subtract 17 from 2023 as fast as possible in front of an audience. You have 2 minutes to get to 0. The kicker is that the audience has the answers in their hand. And if you make a mistake, they'll interrupt you and you have to start off from the beginning. And this is guaranteed to mount a cortisol response. And 99% of people, it's a very commonly used stressor in laboratories. So what they did is they randomized students to either do this alone to do this task with a supportive friend of their choice. So they asked, bring a friend to do this with you, or a 7-year-old golden retriever therapy dog. And what they found was that those that were randomized to do this math task with the dog not only had lower heart rate, both during and after the stressor, but also had less production of the stress hormone cortisol, not only compared to the alone condition, but importantly, compared to the friend condition. In fact, when we have human friends with us, we tend to have more stress. And that's because even if they're not judging us, we have the perception that they might be, even if it's unconscious. Whereas presumably the dog does not know what 2023 minus 17 is, or maybe they do and they just can't tell us about it. But they are, just wagging their tail, happy to be there, excited for you, and really providing that support that seems to be different and potentially better than human support. Another area that we see this is in children's reading programs. So if you've never heard of these, essentially kids that are learning how to read or struggling with reading will read to either therapy dogs in their school, or sometimes will go to local shelters and read to the shelter dogs. It's super cute. And what they find when they actually experimentally study this is that when they read to dogs, compared to reading to their peers, to their teachers, or to their parents, they have more persistence on difficult passages. They report more confidence. And importantly, the kids spend more time reading and persisting through their reading passages. So again, there's something unique about the dog that they're supporting these individuals through these tough times in a way that is perceived as unconditional. And you're probably already thinking about this. Of course, one of the reasons why all of this is happening overall is that dogs make us less stressed. One of the reasons that therapy dogs are all over US college campuses is this exact reason. So during midterms, during finals, almost every college campus has an active therapy dog program, including our university. And really, we think that therapy dogs are serving as a positive distraction, a calming source of attention, and really providing safe and tactile experiences to relieve stress. What we find in all of these studies, and there's been quite a few randomized clinical trials on these dogs, is that it lowers student anxiety, lowers stress, and overall improves mood and happiness. As part of that, we know that dogs are helping us release stress, potentially by helping our brains, calm down a little bit. And we know that dogs help us release these feel-good hormones while also decreasing kind of our stress hormones, which is cortisol. In a really hallmark 2003 study, researchers invited 18 owners and their dogs to come into the lab and just sit down for 20 minutes and interact positively. So talking to the dog, petting the dog, just kind of hanging out. And they collected samples from the person before and after interacting with their dog. And they find that their brains secrete more beta endorphins, more oxytocin, which is really an important, I'm sure you guys all know this, is very important in mother-child relationships. It's involved in love and trust. And dopamine, which is a key output of our brain's pleasure and reward systems. So our brains are firing like crazy, and this makes a lot of sense, right? This is a logical mechanism for why we might benefit. Oxytocin has really taken off since that initial study. Other studies have replicated this and found that during that 20 minutes of interaction, the owners that made and received more eye contact with their dogs tended to have the strongest bond with their dog. And those are the individuals that had the highest increases in oxytocin. So this has really led many researchers to think that this oxytocin is actually one of the mechanisms that allows humans and dogs to form these strong bonds. And potentially that's facilitated in eye contact. So when you see any media about, it's so good to make eye contact with our dogs, it stems from this, which is that we see these oxytocin increases and a lot more when we're making eye contact. And so a really cool way that the science has kind of started to look at this relationship similarly to how we've been looking at mother-child relationships. Okay, so I gave you some examples of how dogs might be impactful kind of in the short term. So they might decrease our stress, might give us some dopamine, help us work through tough times. But what about in the long term? If you were, the alien scientist trying to figure this out, I don't know if that would be enough evidence to suggest that, yeah, we should invest a lot of this. What about things that are helping us, live longer lives and live happier lives and actually like reproduce and spread our genes to the next generation? Like all these things that are really important for survival. So we have evidence of that too. So I think the aliens would be happy. The first is that we know that dogs are really good for our heart health. The actually one of the very first studies ever done in our field, which is, this effect of animals on health, was done in 95 by Erica Friedman, who's very much one of the founding pioneers of our field. And she is a nurse and cardiologist, and she was tracking people that had recently had a heart attack and tracking them over 1 year and looking at basically what is their functioning like a year later. Largely focusing on social support. And then she added in pet ownership to that question, which was pretty unheard of back in 1995. No one would have really asked this question yet. And what she found was pretty astounding and really started this field to take off, which was that there was 4 times greater mortality for non-dog owners than dog owners. And that was controlling for everything, for demographic, socioeconomic status, and physical health and physical activity, all these things. Dog ownership was like the biggest predictor of survival after 1 year. So flash forward many decades later, there's been a lot of research in this area. A meta-analysis just recently came out that compiled all the studies in this area, including data for 3.8 million subjects, and found that overall there's 24% risk reduction for all-cause mortality if you're a dog owner compared to non-dog owners, and 31% risk reduction for cardiovascular-related mortality as well, which is, really the big thing here. And that is, again, controlling for all of the other things that are associated with dog ownership, like being in a higher, socioeconomic status, your race, ethnicity, your age, all of these, the zip code you're living in, all of these things. It seems that dog ownership is really independently emerging as a predictive factor. And of course, the reason why is dogs get us moving. So the research on dog walking has actually tremendously improved over the past 20 years or so, because Fitbits came out and then Apple Watches came out, and now we can actually objectively measure people's activity and compare that before and after they get a dog, or compare dog owners to non-dog owners. And studies have found that dog owners are about 4 times more likely than the average person to meet today's physical activity guidelines, and particularly among older adults that are more likely to be sedentary. They find, lots more minutes of exercise per day, up to 3,000 steps. And importantly, that wasn't all dog walking. It's things like getting up to take your dog outside, refilling their water bowl, playing with them, other ways that dogs are getting us up and moving that is really important for kind of our overall functioning and cardiovascular health. The other kind of long-term health implication that I think dogs fit into is the social isolation phenomenon. And so if you have heard of this, basically social isolation is a growing epidemic, especially in our culture, where some estimates suggest that, when they look at loneliness and the relationship on mortality, it's just as strong as things like being obese or smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. It's very much tied to long-term health, where we know that especially older adults that are socially isolated have much more risk of many poor outcomes, including, dementia and health-related diseases and all of these types of things. But really what dogs are fitting into this is that they are making people more social. So out in public, dogs can be really great icebreakers. If you have been on a patio with the dog, you know this. Essentially, it is kind of weird to approach someone out of nowhere without a dog and just say, "Hey, what's your name?" You're gonna get looked at weird. It's just not normal. But if you come up and say, "Hey, what's your dog's name? What type of dog is it?" It's completely socially acceptable. And what we call dogs is it's a safe and neutral conversation starter that can often get people talking more about things. Oh, I used to have a chocolate lab when I was growing up. all of these things that we can start talking about. We know that this happens on patios and parks, dog parks, etc. It happens when you walk your dog. You tend to talk to your neighbors more. There's a lot of areas that this happens. And for a lot of people, that social interaction can be really important. My favorite studies that have looked at this are actually the observational ones. So this study, again, kind of one of the pioneering studies in this area, had a woman who I think was probably a grad student to walk a moderate speed along the pavement in a downtown city area, and they recorded people's behavior around her. She did this walk alone as well as with a friendly looking dog. It was the same walk, the same pace, the same area, the same time of day, everything. And this was '04, so they had people with like their paper and pencils, like jotting stuff down. I don't know how reliable the data was. They have replicated this effect though. But they found that when they observed everyone's behavior around this person, when she had the dog, she was a little bit more likely to be looked at. She was a lot more likely to be smiled at, and she was way more likely to be talked to. And this was an effect found for all ages and importantly for males and females. And people have replicated this with different types of dogs, and they keep seeing this effect. This is social facilitation at its best. So a reason why this might happen, which has kind of been follow-up research in this area, is that dogs might make us look better to other people. So there's evidence that when I show you this picture, and I ask you about this individual, and I show you this picture, and I ask about this individual, that statistically, you are on average more likely to rate the image on the right as an individual that is perceived as safer, as happier in their own life, as more relaxed, and here's the kicker, as more attractive. Your brains are skipping ahead on what this might mean. Yes, this has been translated to dating profiles. So research group, this is one of my favorite studies ever. It's the Pet Wingman study. They created a bunch of fake Tinder and Bumble profiles of probably lots of grad students again, and basically taking pictures that were the exact same. It's going to keep rotating. But for example, that guitar picture of the person with the guitar on that same porch, one without the dog, one with the dog. They also kept everything else the same, the name, the bios, everything. And they set them out into the world, used AI to track the data, and just saw what they found. And what they found was that the dog profiles had more matches, they added more messages, and they had more interactions. So it is now evidence-based that dogs help you get dates, and it's a widespread phenomenon. And I always like to share that this is how I met my husband, which was on a dating app, and he had a dog in his picture. So it works. Okay, so to wrap up, how do we benefit from dogs? There's a lot of different ways that the research has kind of pointed to. They provide us companionship, they provide us emotional and social support, they can make us less stressed, they can make us healthier in the long term, they can connect us to other people, and finally, they can make us look better. All these things, I think the aliens would be pretty happy to learn about and say, all right, it's okay that you're spending all this money on this animal. They're doing a lot of great things for you, and it kind of makes a lot of sense. And this is where a lot of our research tends to focus on, is looking at these effects. But I like to point out that dogs are not magic. I have shared with you a lot of studies that have found positive effects, but that is not always the case at all. An example of this is the Canines for Childhood Cancer study, which was the first and largest known randomized controlled trial to rigorously measure animal-assisted interventions' impact on the psychosocial outcomes of children that were newly diagnosed with cancer. Absolutely incredible effort done by American Humane Team, still to this day, one of the strongest studies there's ever been done as far as rigor. It followed 106 newly diagnosed children with cancer, largely leukemia, who received regular chemotherapy treatment. They were recruiting from 5 children's hospitals around the United States. They were randomized to either receive weekly visits from a therapy dog for 4 months, or just care as usual, which was visits by hospital staff and child life care. And they had 26 of the therapy dogs across the country. They assessed a wide range of physiological and psychological measures on the dogs, the kids, and the parents. This was a 7-year study, took about $1 million. Just absolutely incredible effort that our field was really, really excited about. What they found was that children in both groups experienced less stress over time at the same rates. There was no change in quality of life, anxiety, or cancer-related quality of life if you were in the dog group versus the control group. When looking at physiology, they found that children who interacted with a therapy dog for those 4 months did not have any different blood pressure and heart rate. And in fact, it was a little bit elevated in the dog group compared to the control group, potentially because they were excited to see the dog. So heart rate and blood pressure went up. This is one of the caveats of physiology. It doesn't just measure stress, it measures excitement. And so sometimes people want to see that in the data, but it doesn't always measure what we want to measure. So yeah, this was unexpected. Outcomes were the same as usual care, but some caveats for this. This was done at a group level. There was a lot of variability in children's diagnosis and severity in cancer that was really hard to control for. And overall, I think the message is that childhood cancer sucks. And potentially, therapy dogs are helping a little bit, but they're not going to magically cure the situation. And they didn't have a dramatic cure effect in this. And that is a completely valid thing. We know that dogs are going to be impactful in some situations and they're not going to be impactful for others. And importantly, it might depend on the individual and the type of cancer and all these other familial factors, things that we just can't really control. So one of the things that our field really focuses on now is really quantifying a lot of these nuances to look at, what about human characteristics? For that study, it was cancer, but for other things, what about race and ethnicity? What about cultural factors? Your gender identity, your trauma background? If you had pets growing up, what about all these things? Do they matter? Everyone always asks about breed, dog characteristics. There's a lot of individual differences there. Not only, breed is one thing, but most importantly is, how calm or excited they are, how social they are. What is their temperament and personality? Does setting matter? So do you find different results if you interact with the dog one-on-one versus in a group? What about who else is in the room? If there's other adults, for example. And then the quality and quantity of interactions. So what actually happens during that 15 minutes of a therapy dog visit? How much did that person pet the dog? How much eye contact was made, given that we think that's a mechanism? What was the dog doing? There's all these things that are probably influencing outcomes and contributing to overall variability that are still very much questioned. Our field is so new that we kind of have a long way to come, a long way to go. And I think it's really exciting. I think we have one of the coolest research topics in the world and feel so lucky to be able to focus on this. But I like to remind people that it's actually way more complicated than you think. And it's a little bit different than just giving a pill that's 50 milligrams. The intervention is a living, breathing animal that has a lot of complexity to it. And yeah, it's actually a hard thing to study sometimes. Okay, I am just going to wrap up with the ending, which again, I've gotten many questions on this. And so I like to end with, all right, so we benefit from dogs. We just talked about that for 30 minutes. But hopefully our dogs benefiting from us, that'd be great if they did, right? And yes, there's evidence that dogs love us too. So the best evidence from this is actually from Dr. Gregory Burns, who is a colleague from Emory University, who managed to train dogs through lots of treats and patients to lay down in an fMRI machine to actually look at what's going on in dogs' brains to figure out what they're thinking. This was a huge breakthrough and revolution in our field to be able to do fMRI on dogs' brains. And he's found really cool stuff. As an example, this is one of his studies. His team did an experiment when they presented cotton swabs with odors from 5 different beings. The first was the dog's own self. The second was a familiar dog that they had known very well. Third was a dog that they had never seen or smelled before, unfamiliar. Fourth was a familiar human, which was their primary caregiver, their owner that they lived with. And then the fifth was a stranger who, again, they had never seen or smelled before. So 5 scents. They were randomized in order, and importantly, the humans were blinded to which one they are presenting the dog. So they just presented it and saw what the brains did. So what they found was that while the areas of the brain associated with smell lit up by all 5 pretty equally, the reward areas of the brain were most activated by the familiar human scent. So essentially concluded that when our dogs smell us, their reward systems are firing and they're excited. And this has kind of been translated, okay, like maybe they love us. Other things that we found is, oxytocin has been this really big push in our field. We started to collect samples from the dogs as well and have confirmed that when dogs and humans interact with each other in a positive way, for example, petting, making eye contact, both the human and the dog are having an increase in these feel-good hormones and having stronger releases of oxytocin. Our very own Evan McLean just published an oxytocin study last week that made a lot of headlines. That was the first study to be done in children, where he found that both children and their pet dogs both had increases in oxytocin after just 10 minutes of interaction. Really the first that has done this in children, but we're finding a lot more about how dogs' brains are interacting with us, which is a very heartwarming, positive thing. I think it kind of helps us justify a little bit what we do. Okay, so in summary, science suggests that, this relationship between dogs and humans is truly something to celebrate. I think is a really interesting area that research is focused on. And I hope you learned something and go home and hug your dog. It was great talking to you. I like to end by just thanking my supporters, which this is my dog and cat, and thank you to them. Thank you to all my other collaborators. There are way too many, so I didn't put them in a slide, but lots of other people doing this great work, and I would love to get in touch with anyone who wants to chat. This is my email. This is our lab's website. And yeah, happy to take some questions as well. And thank you guys so much for your time today.
Questions from the room? Question. There is, yeah. There's one question in the chat, Kerri, if you want to.
Oh. Okay, so the first question is, do you need volunteers to play with dogs in your research lab? So our research lab is actually, we don't do a lot of in-person work. I'll do a lot of remote work. So we're currently study people and their dogs from all over the world. But Evan McLean's lab has dogs in person, and he is always interested in research assistants and has a lot of opportunities to be a tester in his lab, mostly running experiments if you're into that thing, but you do get to play a little bit with the dogs. So I'd reach out to him for that. The second was the therapy dog their own in the subtraction study? So no, this was a certified therapy dog that was an individual had gotten their dog certified through a therapy animal program, and it was the same dog for everyone. And then the third question is, could the blood pressure be lower if the person brought their own dog because of a stronger bond? Yes and no. So the reason why we tend to use a lot of therapy dogs in this research is you can kind of standardize it. So it's the same dog every single time. That's a plus in research, right? But importantly, person's average pet dog, when you bring them into the lab setting, it doesn't really go well. They think it's the vet. They're really anxious. They don't know what's going on. They're in a weird white room with a bunch of strangers. It's not always a positive interaction. The studies that I showed where they do bring people and their dogs in, they do a lot of things up front to kind of make sure that it's going to be a positive experience. They do a lot of the dog sniffing around. They give lots of treats. They kind of pre-screen for any dogs that have anxiety or aggression. So I think that we have, as a field, a lot more opportunity to go inside people's homes and study them and their dogs there, which is the most naturalistic environment, which again, you guys are all family researchers. This has been a push to study mothers and their infants in the house rather than bringing them in. We're doing the same things with dogs. I think it's just stressful for a lot of people and dogs to come into a research lab. So I think, yes, there would be lower blood pressure. If it was their own dog, they have that relationship, but sometimes we don't see that effect in the lab because of that stress. Thanks for the questions. Those are great. Any people in person have any questions, comments? Dog stories?
Um, I'm sorry. I am curious, like, how did you get into this research? Like, why dogs? I think about other like therapeutic animals, like horses, for example. What really sparked your interest?
Yeah, the therapeutic horseback riding world, the horse side of this world is huge and thriving, and there's a whole talk to be done there. I have no experience with horses. I didn't grow up with horses. I never rode horses, besides at summer camp. The people there really have a passion for that. I think the dog people just have passions for dogs and grew up with dogs. A lot of us, including myself, wanted to be vets, and somewhere along the line, I worked at a vet for many years and I was pre-vet. I figured out that I wanted to study healthy, animals that were not sick and dying. And I wanted to study kind of natural behaviors. So I started studying dogs, and was on the dog side for many years before I started studying kind of the human side. No one in our field has like a linear perfect path, especially because this was not an undergraduate major. It still isn't. It's like a very niche thing. So we all kind of just ended up here largely with a passion for animals, but really importantly, a passion for research. And we just get to meld the two together. So yeah, I think I have the dream job. It's a very fun field to be in. I see two questions, or just same question. So Nicholas has a question of what research has been done on the social, emotional, and health effects of grieving the loss of a dog, maybe more generally the emotional effects of aging pets. Yeah, this is a very big and growing area that society as a whole has been a little bit more understanding of every year. We never used to have things like time off work grieving the loss of a pet, and now that's a thing that, for example, Amazon and Google both do. So I think it's becoming more acceptable that losing this relationship is, just as bad, if not sometimes worse, than losing a human relationship. There has been quite a bit of research in this area, just verifying, one, that people experience grief after losing their dogs, like no brainer. And then two, really quantifying this in relation to human relationships. And so they find, the same types of symptoms, the same types of grief courses when people lose their pets, and not just dogs, any sort of pet. So I think it's an area that we've really validated and done some numbers and strong science behind. And we have a lot more intervention now as your pet is aging to kind of prepare for that. One of the worst things about animals is that they don't live as long as us. But vets and social work institutes and as a whole, the mental health field has really been more accepting of the fact that this is also very much a hard thing to go through. Well, thank you guys.
Any questions? Thank you. Can I put you on the spot then and ask you, because if you could just tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing with the police and dogs.
Oh yeah. Actually, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm in Florida visiting the provider that provides these dogs. So we work with nonprofits. We don't train and place dogs. We work with the experts. There's a nonprofit here in Florida that is placing therapy dogs in police stations across the United States free of cost. They are also a service dog provider, so they're also our PTSD service dog collaborators, but they started this new arm, which is, first responders also have trauma. They also have, these kind of needs, and therapy dogs, we know, are pretty impactful in stressful places like hospitals, but they're just now being integrated into places like courtrooms and police stations. And so these areas where not only people coming in might need support, but really importantly, the staff needs support. So the officers themselves. So I don't know if we have definitive data on when the first therapy dog was placed in a police station. It's still pretty new though. And there's only one study. I did an extensive literature review, one study to date on how these dogs are impacting police officers. We have a lot on veterans now. That's a lot of what our research does, but one study to date on how this is impacting police officers. And it was mixed methods, preliminary study. This is a completely uncharted territory where anecdotally, people are saying that these dogs are really having big impacts on improving the station environment, having a little bit more happiness and joy in the office, giving officers a chance to, just lay down and sit down with the dog after a hard case, to debrief when they're with the dog. These police stations really rally behind this dog as like a mascot. They all are obsessed with their dog, and more police stations are asking for them. So we're doing a study comparing police stations that have a full-time therapy dog that works there to police stations that are on the wait list to receive one. And we hope to find some preliminary effects of things like effects on burnout, mental health, job-related satisfaction, and social support. But importantly, one of my undergraduate students is doing a study right now looking at how the presence of a therapy dog is impacting community perceptions of police, which we know could use some help, right? So looking at how the therapy dog on the social media pages and on the website and in person when you go to the police station is helping people be more trusting potentially of law enforcement, and being a little bit more willing to approach kind of a little bit of a bridge between the community and the law enforcement. So maybe I'll come back in a little bit to talk about findings from that, but we're still in data collection.
Thank you. Really interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to all of the exciting research that's continuing to come out from there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks all for joining us.